Dr. Burns' History of Philosophy. Chinese Philosophy, Part 1. 100 Schools of Thought. Lives of Socrates, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. Welcome to an exploration of the two towering pillars of Chinese philosophy, Confucius's Confucianism and Lao Tzu's Daoism. To provide some historical context, let's first consider the timeline of these philosophical giants in relation to Socrates, a key figure in Western philosophy. Socrates lived in the 5th century BCE during a time of unstable democracy in the Athenian city-state. For most of his life, Socrates did not have an income-earning occupation, which led to his wife Xanthippes' frequent complaints about his lack of financial contribution. His work was somewhat similar to that of the sophists, who were paid to teach the art of winning arguments, a highly sought-after skill in the litigious Athenian democracy, where anyone could be charged with a crime and needed to defend themselves in public courts. However, it was illegal to charge fees for defending others, as professional lawyers as we know them did not exist in ancient Athens. Unlike sophists, Socrates used argumentation not to win debates but to seek truth. He believed he could not morally charge for his teachings because he was not imparting new knowledge but rather helping people recollect what they already knew. His free teaching allowed him to gather many followers, the most famous of whom were Plato and Aristotle. Some of his followers used his ideas to attempt to overthrow the democratic regime, and when democracy was restored, Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth and impiety. He failed in his own defense and was executed in 399 BCE at the age of 70 for his political philosophy, which was perceived as a threat to democracy. Confucius and Lao Tzu were both elders to Socrates, with Confucius being almost a century older and Lao Tzu being a generation older than Confucius. Confucius, born in 551 BCE in the state of Lu, was the son of a 60-year-old retired military official and an 18-year-old concubine. He faced early hardships when his father died while Confucius was just 3 years old, leaving him and his young mother to fend for themselves. Despite these challenges, Confucius chose to become a scholar at a young age and pursued a career in the Lu government, eventually rising to prominence. However, his political ideas of centralized governance and reducing the power of local lords made him political enemies, leading to his dismissal. Subsequently, Confucius chose to self-exile from Lu and traveled across various states seeking employment to implement his political ideas without much success. However, he gained a large following along the way. Confucius returned to his home state Lu nearing 70 years old and died at the age of 72. His followers compiled his teachings into the Analects. Confucius famously summarized his life journey through a series of reflections. At 15, I set my heart on learning. This stage emphasizes his dedication to the pursuit of knowledge. At 30, I stood firm, meaning he felt he had established a solid foundation in life, achieving stability and confidence in his professional endeavors. At 40, I had no more doubts, meaning he was free from confusion or temptation and had clarity in his beliefs. At 50, I knew the will of heaven, meaning he understood his life's purpose and felt a greater sense of destiny. At 60, my ear was obedient, meaning Confucius could listen to and understand others with ease, reflecting a deepened wisdom and empathy. At 70, I could follow my heart's desires without overstepping the bounds, indicating a harmonious balance between personal desires and ethical conduct, where Confucius acted freely yet responsibly. It is interesting to see that what Confucius ultimately achieved at the final stage of his life was the attainment of moral harmony between internal desires, fueled by emotion, and moral principles, guided by reason. This contrasts with the disharmony between these elements in Western philosophies, particularly those of David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Hume believed that reason is the slave of the passions, meaning that our emotions primarily drive moral judgments and actions. In response, Kant maintained that reason alone is the judge of moral worth, asserting ought implies can, meaning that when reason dictates an action as our duty, we must be capable of carrying it out, thus restoring the supremacy of reason. Confucius's approach to ethics was not through the systematic development of moral principles, but rather through illustrating them with examples. This moral exemplar method required understanding the context and the character of the individuals involved, which sometimes led to seemingly incoherent moral judgments, even noted by his own students. His most prominent followers, Mencius and Junzi, sought to strengthen Confucian theories with their own interpretations of human nature. Mencius, like Rousseau, believed that human nature is inherently good, emphasizing the potential for virtue and moral development. In contrast, Junzi, akin to Hobbes, argued that human nature is inherently bad, necessitating strict discipline and education to cultivate virtue. These differing views highlight the dynamic and evolving nature of Confucian thought. Lao Tzu, unlike Confucius, was a quiet man who did not seek followers or engage in social networks or public discourse. Due to this lack of public engagement, much of Lao Tzu's life is shrouded in mystery, leaving us to conjecture based on a few known legends. He is believed to have worked as a librarian or archivist in the Chu dynasty, which likely made him well versed in various philosophical theories. Given his philosophy of non-action, or Wu Yi, it seems reasonable to believe that over time, Lao Tzu became disillusioned with philosophical theories of social reform and the corrupting force of power in politics. Also, he likely experienced his own existential angst. Recognizing the infinitesimally small role of human agency in the vast universe, and observing that nature always prevails without effort. This type of enlightenment may have led him to choose the perpetual winner, nature, over human society, prompting him to leave for the West to live a solitary life in the wilderness. According to a well-known legend, as Lao Tzu reached the Western Pass, the gatekeeper Yin Qi recognized him as a sage and pleaded with him to record his teachings for prosperity. Complying with this request, Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching in one sitting. It is a concise, cryptic book consisting of approximately 5,000 Chinese characters. With this book, Lao Tzu was cemented as the founder of Daoism. Upon completing this short book, Lao Tzu rides his water buffalo westward, evoking the imagery of the Western film Shane, in which Shane also initiates a departure from the chaos of society, seeking solace and wisdom beyond the confines of a troubled world. Anyone cultivated in Confucian philosophy might find their mind blown upon opening the Tao Te Ching, which begins with the phrase, "The Tao that can be defined or spoken of is no longer the true Tao." In Confucianism, the Tao represents the path to righteousness, a clear guide for ethical conduct, with Confucius focusing on defining this path through principles and rituals. Lao Tzu's statement challenges this very effort of defining righteousness by suggesting that any attempt to articulate the Tao inherently limits its true essence. To cultivate virtue and achieve social harmony, Confucianism presupposes that humans are well equipped to obtain knowledge of the Tao. With this knowledge, education and moral development of people are possible. However, Lao Tzu's philosophy operates on a deeper plane that questions the very capability of human understanding, inviting reflection on the limitations of language and suggesting that true knowledge of the Tao is impossible. Therefore, it is impossible to obtain virtue and social harmony through artificial means of education. To talk about Taoism, we need to introduce the other famous Taoist, Chuang Tzu, who was born approximately 200 years after Lao Tzu. He wrote his own book titled after his name. Together, the Tao Te Ching and the Chuangzi are must-reads for understanding Taoism. Just like Lao Tzu, Chuangzi's life is shrouded in mystery and known only through anecdotes in his own book. If Lao Tzu's ideas are deep, Chuangzi's ideas are even deeper. While Lao Tzu was skeptical of human capacity to truly know the Tao or the workings of the universe, he was convinced of his existence in this world. Not so for Chuangzi, who famously recounted a dream in which he was a butterfly, fluttering freely and joyfully. Upon awakening, he pondered whether he was a man who had dreamt of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being a man. This parable underscores the mystery of reality and self-identity. We might not be who we think we are. We could be just a brain in a vat, and our idea of ourselves and the external world could be a simulation by a mad scientist. This line of questioning predates Descartes' skeptical question of the external world. While many Western philosophers, from Descartes to Berkeley, have sought answers through the assurance of a non-deceptive God, when we eliminate that answer, we really do not have a definitive answer to the question as pondered by Chuangzi. Confucianism and Daoism are two of the most well-known Chinese philosophies in Western culture today. However, when Lao Tzu and Confucius were alive, their ideas were just a few among many competing theories. They lived during an era known as the contention of the 100 schools of thought. However, this golden age of philosophy did not come about because the era was peaceful and scholars were able to engage in pure intellectual pursuits detached from any practical needs, as we might imagine when thinking of philosophy as it is taught in modern universities, often isolated in the ivory tower. Nothing could be further from the truth. To truly appreciate the philosophies of Confucius and Lao Tzu, we must understand where they were coming from, the cultural and intellectual zeitgeist of China during their time. Even the most profound thinkers are shaped by the eras they live in. Just as Aristotle's concept of the natural slave may seem blasphemous to modern sensibilities, it was a product of the human-constructed world in which he lived. In this first part of our exploration, we will delve into the social, political, and historical backdrop of this period, setting the stage for a deeper examination of the philosophies of Confucius and Lao Tzu in the following sections. Join us as we uncover the timeless wisdom of these ancient thinkers and their enduring impact on the world. Govern the water, govern the nation. In the 6th century BCE China, two towering figures emerged whose philosophies would profoundly shape East Asian culture for millennia: Lao Tzu and Confucius. If Confucius' teachings could be distilled into the principle, govern oneself and others through proper action, Lao Tzu's philosophy might be summed up as, govern oneself and others through non-action, Wu Wei. To grasp the essence of their contrasting views, we can turn to the unexpected but fitting metaphor, the ancient Chinese art of flood control. Chinese civilization was born along the banks of the Yellow River, often called the cradle of Chinese civilization. This river, known for its yellow hue due to an exceptionally high silt content, 17 times that of the Nile, has a long history of devastating floods. These floods, caused by sediment buildup that raised the riverbed above surrounding lands, have been catastrophic. The 1887 flood alone is estimated to have killed as many as 2 million people, earning the Yellow River the grim nickname China's Sorrow. Flooding was a significant challenge in ancient China, one that demanded effective governance. One of the key innovations in response to this challenge was the development of a centralized government. The Yellow River's unpredictable and often devastating floods required large-scale coordination and resources that only a strong central authority could provide. This necessity led to the emergence of powerful, centralized dynasties in China, similar to those in Egypt, where centralized authority was also crucial for managing the Nile's floods. In this way, strong dynasties can be seen as a political invention designed to solve problems that required centralized governance. This explains why a centralized government did not emerge in the Greek city-states, which were divided by mountains and islands. The geographic isolation of these regions meant there was no pressing problem that necessitated centralized control. China's first centralized government, the Shi dynasty, was established around 2070 BCE by Yu the Great, a legendary figure renowned for taming the floods. The phrase, "Yu the Great controls the waters," became synonymous with effective governance. It underscores the importance of leadership in managing natural resources and ensuring the people's well-being. In China, the ability to control the Yellow River's floods was seen as a mark of good governance and a mandate from heaven. There are two distinct approaches to managing floods. One involves actively controlling and managing the water through measures like building dams and levees, implementing irrigation systems, and organizing large-scale public works. This approach aligns with Confucius philosophy, which emphasizes proper action and active governance. Historically, China's flood control efforts have often reflected Confucian principles. The legendary Yu the Great, for example, is credited with taming floods through extensive engineering projects, embodying the Confucian ideal of cultivating virtue in rulers and officials to create a well-ordered society. However, active flood management, while often necessary, comes with its own set of challenges. One major issue is the false sense of security it can create among populations in flood-prone areas, potentially encouraging further development in these risky zones. If flood control measures fail or are overwhelmed by extreme weather events, the consequences can be devastating. The environmental impact of active flood control is also significant. Structures like dams and levees can disrupt natural river ecosystems, affecting wildlife habitats and altering crucial sediment distribution patterns. Over-reliance on engineered solutions can exacerbate downstream flooding by funneling water into narrow channels, increasing its speed and destructive power. Paradoxically, aggressive flood control can even lead to water shortages. By rapidly channeling floodwaters away, these systems often reduce groundwater recharge and decrease water availability during dry seasons. This creates crises for regions that rely on seasonal flooding to replenish aquifers and maintain soil moisture for agriculture. Additionally, large dams increase evaporation from reservoir surfaces, further worsening water scarcity. Moreover, flood management infrastructure requires constant maintenance to remain effective. Neglect can lead to catastrophic failures, potentially causing more severe flooding than would have occurred naturally. Given these considerations, it's not surprising that Lao Tzu's philosophy of non-action, or Wu Wei, is appealing. Instead of attempting to control water, Lao Tzu advocates for being in harmony with it, allowing rivers to follow their natural course, adapting human settlements to natural flood cycles, and minimizing interference with ecosystems. Lao Tzu's approach suggests working with nature rather than against it, embodying the belief that the best government governs least, allowing things to follow their natural course. This contrast between passive adaptation and active management is a recurring theme in Chinese philosophy and governance, extending beyond flood control to encompass broader approaches to social order, politics, and the relationship between humans and nature. Lips gone, teeth cold. Lao Tzu and Confucius, two of China's greatest philosophers, were both products of the Zhou dynasty. So what was the political climate that molded these towering figures? The Zhou dynasty was once a unified giant, but by the time of Lao Tzu and Confucius, it was crumbling, its power fractured among warring states. Just 200 years earlier, China had been unified under the Zhou, but cracks began to show as the empire struggled to maintain control over its vast territory. To manage their sprawling kingdom, the Zhou rulers divided it into fiefdoms, granting land to loyal relatives. While this strategy helped in the short term, it also sowed the seeds of their downfall. These regional lords, empowered by land and authority, gradually became more independent. They built their own armies, forged their own alliances, and increasingly saw themselves as equals to the Zhou king rather than subordinates. This power struggle escalated into full-blown conflict, leading to the fragmentation of the Zhou dynasty. The resulting chaos gave rise to two tumultuous eras: the Spring and Autumn period, 770 to 476 BCE, and the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE, with Lao Tzu and Confucius living toward the end of the former. The name Spring and Autumn period comes from the Spring and Autumn Annals, a historical record of the state of Lu from 722 to 481 BCE. The annals were so named because they chronologically documented events season by season. Welcome to the Spring and Autumn period, a time of relentless chaos and warfare. The Zhou king, once a powerful ruler, had become little more than a figurehead, while real power rested with ambitious warlords. Among these warlords was Duke Jin of Jin, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his sword. He sought to expand his territory, guided by his cunning advisor, Sun Qi. Sun Qi, a master of strategic and often ruthless political maneuvers, embodied a pragmatic, Machiavellian approach to governance. His actions, driven by a desire to maintain the power and stability of Jin, involved political intrigue and manipulation, all aimed at ensuring Jin's dominance in an era of constant power struggles. Chunji knew that Jin's military might alone wasn't enough. The strategic importance of the state of Yu, which lay between Jin and their target, Guo, couldn't be ignored. With a sly grin, he proposed a plan. "Duke," he said, "why waste lives conquering Yu? A few dazzling gifts, precious stones, perhaps some fine horses, will surely convince their short-sighted leader to let our army pass through." Duke Xian stroked his chin, a hint of reluctance flickering in his eyes. "But Junji," he pondered, "those are valuable treasures." Junji leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think of it this way, Your Grace. Guo and Yu are like lips and teeth. If Guo falls, Yu won't be far behind. Consider those gifts an investment in Yu's inevitable demise." A slow, predatory smile spread across Duke Jian's face. "You've convinced me, Zunzi. Prepare the gifts." The dazzling treasures arrived in Yu, and the gullible Duke of Yu was smitten. Blinded by greed, he readily agreed to allow Jin's army passage. But not everyone in Yu was so easily swayed. Gong Zhiki, a wise advisor with a heavy heart, approached the king. "Your Majesty," he pleaded, "consider the fate of Guo. They are our neighbors, as essential to our survival as lips are to teeth. As the saying goes, when lips are gone, teeth get cold. If Guo falls, Yu will surely follow." The Duke of Yu, however, was too intoxicated by the prospect of Jin's favor. "Nonsense, Gong Zhiki," he scoffed. "Jin is a powerful ally. How can we refuse them passage?" Seeing the writing on the wall, Gong Zhiki sighed, gathered his family, and fled Yu. Jin's army marched triumphantly through Yu, their path clear. They crushed Guo with ease and soon turned their sights on their duped host. The Duke of Yu, venturing out to greet them in misplaced courtesy, was promptly captured. Yu fell just as tragically as Guo. This outcome illustrates the principle of Sun Mong Chi Han. When one part of a system suffers, those connected to it are also endangered. The fall of Guo weakened Yu's defenses, leaving it vulnerable to Jin's advances. This idiom emphasizes mutual dependence, highlighting how the fate of allied powers is intertwined. It serves as a moral lesson for leaders to recognize the broader implications of their decisions regarding defense and alliances. Neglecting this interconnectedness can lead to dire consequences, as seen in the tragic fates of both Guo and Yu. The Machiavellian maneuvering of Jin allowed it to become one of the strongest dukedoms. But was Jin destined to unify China, replace the Zhou dynasty, and end the Spring and Autumn era? What became of Jin? Actually, the state of Jin was a house built on sand, as it soon descended into a maelstrom of internal strife. The Battle of Jinyang was a pivotal moment in Jin's history, a clash that would ultimately determine the fate of the once mighty state. At the heart of the conflict were four powerful clans: Zhao, Wei, Han, and Ji. The Ji clan sought to dominate the other clans and the entire state of Jin. It allied with the houses of Wei and Han to lay siege on the city of Jinyang, which was under the control of the Zhao family. Zhao, however, was able to convince the other two clans with the lips gone, teeth cold argument, managing to persuade them to defect from their alliance with the Ji family. The new Zhao Wei Han alliance led to the defeat and destruction of the Ji family. To avoid any further conflict and the potential for mutual destruction, the three clans made a fateful decision: to divide the remnants of Jin among themselves. Thus, in 403 BCE, the once mighty state of Jin was formally divided into three powerful states: Han, Wei, and Zhao. This seismic shift ushered in a new era, the Warring States period. The division of Jin shattered the fragile equilibrium among the states. With three formidable powers emerging from the ashes of a once unified realm, the stage was set for a brutal competition for supremacy. The ensuing conflicts would be marked by unprecedented brutality and innovation as states vied for territory, resources, and ultimate dominance. 100 Schools of Thought. As the old Zhou dynasty crumbled and new powers emerged and clashed across the land of China, survival and prosperity required innovative and creative thinking. In these desperate times, traditional molds were broken, and wars were fought not just with arms but with intellect. The demands for wisdom became crucial for personal and political survival, leading to the rise of the scholar class, known as the Shi. In ancient China, those not born into nobility had four primary occupational paths, collectively known as the four occupations: scholar, peasant farmer, artisan or craftsman, and merchant or trader. Societal respect was often given in that order. The Shi consisted of scholars or gentry who were respected for their education and roles in administration and intellectual leadership. Originally, the Shi were military officers under the great lords of the Shang and early Zhou dynasties. However, as warfare evolved with the introduction of new weaponry, allowing large armies of less trained soldiers to engage in battle, the Shi transitioned from a warrior class to highly educated elites and scholars. By the Spring and Autumn period, this shift had become more pronounced. As states competed for supremacy, rulers sought out talented individuals to provide visionary guidance and serve as advisors and administrators, regardless of their background. This meritocratic trend enabled many Shi to ascend to positions of great influence. These scholars often traveled among various states, seeking bureaucratic roles to implement their ideas, frequently serving as military strategists and engineers. Their respect and elevated social status were rooted in their education and roles in administration and intellectual pursuits, setting them apart from commoners. This social structure reflected the values and priorities of ancient Chinese society, emphasizing the importance of education and the scholarly class. The story of Mencius's mother moving 3 times is a well-known legend that illustrates this point. Initially living near a cemetery, Mencius imitated funeral rites, prompting his mother to move to a marketplace, where he began mimicking merchants. Dissatisfied with both environments, she finally settled near a school, where Mencius adopted scholarly behaviors, eventually becoming a leading Confucian scholar. She became synonymous with prominent intellectuals, many of whom would become leading thinkers in what is known as the 100 Schools of Thought. This term refers to the period of intellectual and philosophical flourishing in China during the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods, spanning approximately 550 years. During this time, there was an explosion of philosophical ideas covering nearly all fields of philosophy, from cosmological metaphysics to various applied fields, such as the philosophy of medicine and philosophy of war. Many of these ideas became deeply entrenched in East Asian cultural practices. Living amid political upheaval and the constant threat of war, it is not surprising that many of these philosophers aimed to answer how to achieve social order and lasting peace. However, they differed on how to achieve these goals, and the most influential school of thought that provided solutions was Confucianism. In fact, Confucianism in Chinese is referred to as Yuga, which means school of scholars. This reflects Confucianism's strong association with scholarly endeavors and its prominent role in intellectual and cultural traditions. Confucianism advocated for a hierarchical order, emphasizing ethical governance, rituals, and proper conducts through the cultivation of virtue. Confucians believed that a harmonious society could be achieved if each person fulfilled their role according to their place in the social hierarchy. To Confucius, the legitimacy of a ruler's authority was not derived merely from his birthright, but from the virtues he exhibited, such as benevolence, righteousness, and wisdom. A ruler without virtue would lose legitimacy and, therefore, the right to rule. Since legitimacy was tied to the moral character of the ruler, moral and political philosophy became deeply interconnected in ancient Chinese thought. This is quite different from modern philosophical thinking, where moral and political philosophy are often viewed as two independent fields. For example, the influential political philosopher John Rawls argued that in liberal societies where people hold diverse and often conflicting moral, religious, and personal values, politics cannot be based on a single moral framework. Rawls posited that imposing any one moral vision would lead to instability and discontent among those who disagree with the state-imposed morality. From this perspective, Rawls concluded that political legitimacy must stem from the consent of people with diverse moral, religious, and personal values. Of course, Rawls' premises and conclusions are matters of contention. In contrast, most scholars of the 100 Schools of Thought accepted the Confucian paradigm of political legitimacy deriving from the virtue of the ruler, even as they objected to specific aspects of it. Mohism, founded by Mozi, was one of the most intellectually robust alternatives to Confucianism, particularly targeting the inconsistencies in Confucianism's moral system that arose from its hierarchical social order. Mohists argued that Confucianism's emphasis on relational ethics, such as a son's duty to his father, led to moral dilemmas and partiality, where duties to family and close relations were prioritized over broader ethical principles like justice. For instance, if a son witnessed his father committing an immoral act, Confucian teachings might compel him to choose filial loyalty over justice. Mohists believed this partiality was the root cause of social problems and instead advocated for impartial love, promoting the idea that ethical behavior should prioritize the welfare of all individuals equally. Legalism, another prominent philosophy in ancient China, rejected both Mohists' universal love and Confucian's benevolence as impractical means of achieving social order. Instead, legalism emphasized strict laws and harsh punishments to maintain order and stability, believing that humans are inherently selfish and inclined to wrongdoing. Legalism's focus on ruling through law sparked a significant debate in Chinese political philosophy between governance by law and governance by virtue. While not as influential as Mohism or legalism, agriculturalism is noteworthy for its egalitarianism. Agriculturalists advocated for a society based on agrarian self-sufficiency, where everyone, including the king, earned their livelihood from agricultural labor rather than through taxation. Confucians dismissed agriculturalist ideas as impractical, labeling their proponents as southern barbarians with a twittering tongue. Confucians took the criticisms from Yangism rather seriously. Yangism, founded by Yang Zhu, emphasized ethical egoism, advocating for self-preservation and personal well-being above all else. The phrase, "If by plucking one hair I might benefit the whole world, I would not do it," encapsulates Yang Zhu's philosophy. Consequently, it is not surprising that Yangists rejected Mohism, as they believed that universal love goes against human nature. They were cynical toward altruism or the love of others, viewing it as disguised self-love or propaganda for self-sacrifice for others' sake. Yangists also rejected Confucianism, seeing its duties and rituals as hindrances to personal autonomy and authentic selfhood. Confucians responded to Yangism by arguing that ethical egoism, where everyone pursues their own self-interest, would lead to social disorder and chaos, similar to a Hobbesian state of nature. To restore social order and peace, individuals must embrace social responsibility. Confucianism viewed Yangism as harmful not only to society but also to individuals, believing that true human fulfillment could only be achieved through the cultivation of virtues and the fulfillment of one's duties within the social order. While comparing Confucianism with Mohism and Yangism, Mencius positioned Confucianism as a balanced approach between the extremes of Yangist egoism and Mohist altruism, advocating for a middle path that balances personal pursuits with collective concerns. And finally, Taoists criticized Confucianism's emphasis on rituals and structured social order, arguing that these could cause more harm than inaction. Instead, Taoism advocated for living in harmony with the natural order and minimal government intervention, a concept known as non-action, Wu Wei. Another school worthy of mentioning is the School of Names, which made significant contributions to the study of language, logic, and the nature of reality. Known as the logicians or disputers, this school was renowned for its exploration of paradoxes and logical puzzles. One of their most famous paradoxes is "a white horse is not a horse." This paradox can be explained using an argument by contradiction. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that a white horse is simply a horse. Then, of course, a black horse is also a horse. Then white horse and black horse are both the same as horse. This leads to the illogical conclusion that a white horse is the same as a black horse. The paradox, "a white horse is not a horse," illustrates the limitations of language and classification by demonstrating how linguistic categories can lead to misunderstandings about identity and classification. If we accept that a white horse is simply a horse, we must also accept that any specific characteristic, such as color, is irrelevant to the object's identity. This contradicts how we categorize and understand objects in reality, as distinctions between things are not fixed by nature, but are instead conventional and subject to change. The school of names used this paradox to challenge the assumptions of other philosophical schools, highlighting the complex relationship between language and reality. Dismissing the 100 schools and respecting only Confucianism. What happened to the 100 schools of thought? When China was finally unified under the Jin dynasty in 221 BCE, the first emperor, Jin Shi Huang, adopted legalism as the state's guiding philosophy. Legalism emphasized strict and harsh laws, a stark contrast to Confucianism, which advocated governance based on the ruler's moral example. Under legalism, the ruler's morality was irrelevant, and dissent was perceived as a threat to centralized authority. Jin Shi Huang infamously ordered the burning of books and burying of Confucian scholars. This oppressive enforcement of legalism aimed to eradicate intellectual dissent and enforce ideological conformity. But it also fueled widespread resentment, contributing to the dynasty's downfall after only 15 years. The Han Dynasty, which succeeded the Jin in 206 BCE, initially took a pragmatic approach to governance, incorporating elements from various philosophical schools. However, as the dynasty progressed, Confucianism became the official state ideology. Emperor Wu of Han, following the advice of the scholar Dong Zhongzhu, implemented the policy of dismissing the 100 schools and respecting only Confucianism. This move solidified Confucianism as the dominant philosophy for governance and education. The Han government established an imperial academy to train officials in Confucian classics and instituted a civil service examination system based on Confucian texts. Confucianism remained the dominant political philosophy for nearly 2 millennia, enduring through various dynastic changes. Its focus on maintaining the social hierarchy and encouraging individuals to fulfill their roles within the social order made it an effective tool for preserving the status quo. This integration of Confucian ethics with practical statecraft not only shaped Chinese bureaucracy and intellectual life, but also significantly influenced neighboring countries like Korea and Japan. Regarding the fate of legalism, with the adoption of Confucianism, legalism was officially denounced and ceased to exist as an independent school of thought. However, the Confucian ideal of governance with virtue alone was never fully realized in practice. Instead, strong laws were still needed. For this reason, legalist elements merged with mainstream Confucianism, resulting in a blend of legal governance and benevolent rule in Chinese imperial politics. As for Taoism, while Confucianism remained closely linked to social and political structures, Taoism's emphasis on simplicity and naturalness provided a counterbalance to Confucianism's focus on social roles and ethical governance. During the Han Dynasty and beyond, Taoism began to interact with Buddhism, which had been introduced to China from India. Taoism absorbed some Buddhist concepts, and the two traditions often blended, enriching the spiritual and religious practices in China. The school of names, Yangism, and Mohism all declined after the unification of China under the Jin dynasty. The paradoxes and dialectical reasoning of the school of names were viewed as frivolous, and much of its work was destroyed during the book-burning campaign. The individualism of Yangism and the egalitarianism of Mohism did not align with the authoritarian ideologies of the Jin dynasty, leading to their rapid decline. However, the notions of personal well-being from Yangism and universal love from Mohism were absorbed into Taoism, enriching its philosophical and religious dimensions. Interestingly, Mohism experienced a revival during the 19th century Yuan dynasty as scholars sought intellectual resources to address challenges posed by Western influences and internal crises. Mohism's pragmatic approach to statecraft and scientific knowledge made it appealing during this transformative period. In the early 20th century, during the communist era in China, Mohism's emphasis on social equity resonated with the goals of the communist regime. As a result, Mohism was re-examined and appreciated for its potential contributions to modern governance and social ethics. As we can see, Confucianism, Daoism, Mohism, and legalism are particularly important because they were adopted as state governing ideologies at different times or have significantly influenced East Asian culture. For this reason, we will examine them in detail. The philosophies of the 100 schools of thought are as central to East Asian culture as the Bible and Christianity are to Western culture.